Hey, what's up guys? Dizzy Nuts here. How you guys doing? Today we're going to be talking about a composition technique called leading lines. Let's go. Now when it comes to composition in the photos, it was one of the hardest things for me to be able to grasp and to understand, because I always felt that my photos really didn't catch what I was trying to show. So using this technique, which is leading lines, you're going to see with a couple tips I'm going to show you how you can draw the eye to a certain part of your photo and make the photo more interesting and something that stands out from the rest of the photos that are out there. The leading line technique refers to a line that leads the viewer's eye from one part of a composition to another. Usually these lines can start at the bottom or even the sides, which can lead the viewer's eye upward from the foreground of the image to the background. Now note, the leading lines can be anything: rivers, railing, a long Disney queue line, anything, and even marks on the road. Even if it looks like a line and is capable of guiding the viewer's eye, then it can work. Now leading lines can be absolutely anything, and the first thing that comes to mind, I'm sure you probably thought of it, is Main Street USA, where you got Cinderella's castle at the end and you got the lines going up into the Cinderella's castle at the end. Now there's a bunch of other photos I'm going to show here where I use the leading lines technique, and the cool thing is that you'll see that sometimes you can even use multiple leading lines. Let's go look in the computer. The first one that we got is obviously something that you've seen, I'm sure, a bunch of times, which is Main Street USA, and you got those leading lines walking up the street all the way to Cinderella's castle. Now there is another technique that's involved in this photo, which is actually called forced perspective, which is where they some of the sizes of the buildings are different, and the size of the castle in ratio to what you're seeing makes it look as a longer street than what it really is. But you can see here the leading lines of the side of the streets going up and how it focuses to make the eye of the viewer go to the Cinderella's castle. The next shot here is obviously done with a fisheye shot, which is the Tomorrowland Bridge as it was before. And with the fisheye, you can get some really cool shots, but you also have to be very careful that it is lined up, because sometimes if it's just a little bit to the, tilted to the side, it makes it that it's really hard to fix afterwards. Now with that said, also when it comes to leading lines, another tip that I can give you is to try to use the widest angle possible, because it gives that effect of going of a really wide scene, and you sort of like can create some leading lines going into the center of the screen. And in this case, it's a perfect example where you can see the leading lines coming up from the side to the top of the sign here on what was the Tomorrowland Bridge. Now in the case of leading lines, you can use other stuff besides fences and walkways. You can actually use water. So in this case, you can see the boat of the steamboat going around, and I put the river on the side coming up from the side of the picture, and I focused the boat on the middle of the image, which is the one that you see here. Now going back on the topic of using the ultra wide angle lens or fisheye lens to get that really cool effect for the leading lines, I got a couple of shots here that I took of Cinderella's castle going up one of the walkways, in this case the right hand side, and I want to show you the difference of using like a regular lens as to using an ultra wide angle lens, and a couple of other tips I'm going to show you. So the first one on this one is, obviously you can see I shot it in portrait mode, and the effect of going upwards with the leading lines, although it's there with the railing, it just doesn't look as impacting as it would with an ultra wide angle lens. Now another tip that I always give is that look at in this case you can see that the railing, I left some of the railing, the entrance of the railing there on the bottom right of the screen, which I think doesn't look good. So it's okay to crop some of the stuff that you're going to be using as leading lines. If it's a fence, it's okay. If it's a lake, you want to cut some of the stuff up where there's land. So what I always try to do is start with what you're using as leading lines on the image. So if it's a river, put the river completely on that corner like we saw on the one of the Thunder Mountain. Now here is the next shot that I did with the ultra wide angle lens, and I think it looks more impacting than using the one that shot in portrait mode. Now sadly, if the photos goes to Instagram, you can't really appreciate this, but if you're going to use this as something like for Facebook or for your desktop, it looks more impacting than the other one. Now another thing to see on this photo is that, as you can see, I'm really low on the bottom on shooting upwards at an angle, which is another tip I like to give, is that when you're doing stuff like this with leading lines, the lower you can get, the better it is. And then here is the same shot, shooting with the tripod pretty high, and I got obviously the entrance of the railings, so you can see that the leading line doesn't look as good. So again, when it comes to using leading lines on railings, always make sure that the railing is part of the left hand side or the right hand side or whatever you're using, and to not put like the entrance of it, because like you see here, it basically like disrupts the flow of that line and trying to make your eye go into the center of the photo. Here's another tip for you. And this photo, obviously you got the really cool Leave a Legacy pylon there lining up, going up straight. But it's okay to use more than one leading lines. In this case, you can see that we got the monorail crossing as well. So you got that really cool two leading lines on this photo that looks really cool, and you got the sunset in the back. So it's okay to use more than one. So just for you to know. Here's another one where I'm shooting really low, and in this case I'm using literally the crack between the floor to do the leading line up to Kylo Ren's spaceship, which gives it a bit of it more of that effect in your face. Again, here's another one from Epcot, which I'm using the flower bed that's in the entrance to create that going up effect into Spaceship Earth. Now here, another cool thing to note, that if you want to try, you can actually tilt your images when you're using leading lines. It's okay to do so, nothing wrong with that, and looks pretty cool. Again, I'm shooting from the bottom up, literally almost on the floor, and if I'm not mistaken, I think my camera was sitting on the backpack for this one, so that way it's shooting upwards in an angle, and obviously shot with the fisheye, so you can see those really cool effects on the side. Now again, when you're shooting a fisheye, make sure it's balanced. At least I like to try to make sure that it's balanced, which means that I try to crop the same on both sides so it looks even and balanced on your photo. Okay, here's another one that I shot for in Galaxy's Edge, which is inside the Millennium Falcon. And this one, interestingly, I left the sides of the door because I wanted to give it that feel that you're inside a tight space. So that's why I left these two sides here, because I wanted to give that, you know, you're in the cabin, you know, you're right there in a tight spot. So if you do not want to have that feel, like have it more open, then you can go ahead and crop that out. But I thought it looked cool creating that tight environment. Another cool tip that I recommend to a couple people when you're doing stuff like this with leading lines, and I call it the helicopter shots, and it's basically where you would put the camera on a tripod, lift it as high as possible, and shoot downwards in an angle. Now if your camera has one of these popping out screens that you can use, in the case mine has it, a Canon 80D, which is what I use for this, I just lift it in an angle, put the timer for 10 seconds. When it hits 5 or 6 seconds, then I lift it up and I take the shot, and it creates for some really cool effects. Besides shooting upwards, in this case you're shooting downwards in an angle, and you still got the leading lines going in, and it creates a really cool effect like this. Okay, the last two photos are ones that I recently took at the Flower and Garden here for 2022, and this is where I actually used the same effect. I shot upwards from the bottom up, and I am using the flower beds. Now be careful when you're shooting flower beds that you are shooting upwards in an angle like this, because you don't want your camera to focus on the bottom stuff and not focus on the top, or actually focus on the two of them, because that's actually called a different technique called near and far, which we'll explain in another video. But for this video, which I'm using the technique of leading lines, what I'm doing is that I'm using the flower bed to go upwards towards the in this case the monorail. So you can see on the bottom it is actually out of focus, which is what we want to make sure that we do, because we don't want it to be all like in focus and everything look really good, unless that's the effect that you're looking for. But in this case, since I want to lead the line up into the monorail, I left that bottom part out of focus. And here is the second shot where I did exactly the same thing, where the bottom part is out of focus, but Goofy and Spaceship Earth are in focus. Okay, pretty cool, right? So that's the technique of leading lines. Now you can use this as well as you can not use this, because rules are always meant to be broken. Now, like I'd like to tell everybody, always the end result is what matters, and if you're happy with the end result, then great. But it's always good to learn these techniques in case you want to learn what's happening behind the scenes. Until then, guys, stay awesome. See ya.